Understanding ethics isn't only essential for interviews, but also for your career as a doctor, which is why this video is still essential even if you've already had your interviews. Ethics has been defined as, are you ready for this? The analytical activity in which the concepts, assumptions, beliefs, attitudes, emotions, reasons, and arguments underlying medico-moral decision-making are examined critically. But basically, if you're hoping that ethics will provide simple and straightforward answers, you will be disappointed. But what we can do is structure any ethical scenario into 4 key components or pillars and elaborate on each one to hopefully come up with the best possible course of action that is deemed ethically moral, or in other words, that will not get you struck off the GMC. This video will be going through these 4 pillars, which are autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. Then it will be taking a deeper dive with an actual simulated case scenario that challenges these 4 pillars for comprehensive understanding. So hopefully by the end of this video, you'll be able to make ethically moral decisions in your sleep. That was a joke. It will never be easy, but it can be easier. If you already know the 4 pillars well and want to skip straight to the juicy part, which is the case, I'll leave timestamps for you guys somewhere on the screen or in the description down below. Before going into the 4 pillars, it's important to talk about how principles apply to a certain case. In the ideal world, we should uphold each of these 4 principles. However, in the real world, we must balance the demands of these principles by determining which carries more weight in that particular case. So for example, consider a patient that was diagnosed with an acutely infected appendix. Our medical goal should be to provide the greatest benefit to this patient, which would be immediate surgery, an appendectomy. On the other hand, surgery and general anesthesia carry some small risk to an otherwise healthy patient, and we are under the obligation not to harm the patient. Now, our moral rationale will tell us that the patient would be in far greater danger of harm if the appendix ruptured if we don't do the surgery than the surgical procedure and the anesthesia itself. So that is why, in most cases, surgery is carried out. Now, autonomy means that the patient has ultimate control over their medical treatment. Autonomy states that the patient has the right to make their own decisions about their life and treatment, even if this means going against medical advice. There are exceptions to this, however, such as if a patient is detained under the Mental Health Act or the MHA and is deemed unable to make decisions for themselves about their medical treatment. Now, whenever a patient is making a decision on their medical treatment, it is important that it has been explained to them, including the risks. The patient must be able to retain this information, process it, and communicate their decision back to you. Autonomy also allows the patient to follow their own cultural, religious, and spiritual beliefs with regards to their treatment. I think the most classical example would be a Jehovah's Witness who refuses blood transfusions. Now, non-maleficence means basically to do no harm. Their pillar is all about minimizing the harm that the treatment might have or might do to a patient. It is important to weigh up all the risks, those that come with an intervention and those that come without. Now, non-maleficence and beneficence often come as a pair and seem like the same thing. However, there are subtle differences. Now, the conflict between non-maleficence and beneficence is the most common one healthcare professionals have to deal with on a daily basis. For example, surgery which causes short-term harm to the patients, or maleficence, versus the long-term benefit for it, or beneficence. Now, beneficence basically means to do good, but it's slightly a bit more complex than this. It is all about maximizing the benefits of medical care for a patient. Now, doctors must promote the course of action that they believe is in the best interest for the patient. Now, important considerations surrounding this principle of beneficence is whether the treatment will actually fix the patient's condition and whether the course of action is actually proportionate to the condition. Now, take for example, someone comes in with a broken leg, they're otherwise very fit and healthy and have no other complications. Amputations would solve the immediate issue because without a leg, we technically haven't broken it. So although this would solve the issue, it is completely disproportionate to the problem. The patient is much better off being put in a splint or a cast if it's a minor fracture, or have an order of surgery, which is basically open reduction internal fixation, if it's a severe break. Now, justice is the last pillar, and because it's probably the last pillar, it's what a lot of people struggle with. In fact, it's what I struggle with the most personally. Basically, the definition of justice is the law. Justice is about where the ethical and moral decision fits into the legal framework. Essentially, justice asks what the legal guidelines are and whether a course of action is actually compatible with the patient's rights. However, it also considers the wider impact on society. It's also about fairness and the distribution of the benefits, the costs and the risks. Justice is especially relevant to the NHS, which is, committed to providing healthcare for everyone. Under this principle, it is important that no one is disadvantaged on access to healthcare. As well as looking at the fairness of the action and the legality, it must be considered whether one group is being prioritized over another, and if so, is there justification for this? Now, here's the scenario. A 76-year-old man is at the GP with a newly diagnosed AAA, or an abdominal aortic aneurysm, and he's been told that he has a 15% chance per year of this aneurysm, or this little balloon, bursting and killing him almost instantly. He has been told that the surgeons can fix this, but due to his existing comorbidities, he has a 10% chance of dying during this operation. Now, in terms of autonomy, a doctor can't tell him whether or not to have the operation, but can only point out the facts, which would include details of the procedure, intended benefits, foreseeable risks, and any other information that the patient might find relevant to the procedure, such as recovery time, length of hospital stay, and etc. It is also the doctor's job to provide this information accurately so that the patient can make a balanced and informed decision as to whether they consent to the procedure or not. It is also the responsibility of the doctor to present the information in a way and at a level that the patient understands. The patient can't make an informed decision if they don't understand what's happening. Problems with autonomy occur when we do not believe, or the doctor does not believe, that the patient has the mental capacity to make this autonomous decision. Great care is taken in medicine to establish whether or not someone has mental capacity, and it must be remembered that certain disease processes can impact capacity, such as neurological diseases like dementia or cerebrovascular diseases like strokes, for example, just to name a couple. The surgeons have offered to do the operation with the intended benefit of prolonging his life. They also pointed out the possibility of unintended harm in the operation, which is, the unintended 10% chance of death. This basically leaves it in the patient's hands to make the decision whether he finds that 10% risk of dying a suitable trade-off for likely extending his life by several years. This is a decision that must be taken primarily by this patient, as long as he has the capacity to do so, because 10% risk of dying is acceptable to some people, but not to others. Now, if we look at non-maleficence, and if we look at this example, the surgeons have stated, death as a possible outcome. But also, we have not mentioned the fact that he could feel quite sick, he could feel quite ill from the anesthetic, and may even suffer from the pain after the surgery, post-operatively, after the effects of anesthesia have started to wean or wear off. So, how is this acceptable? A way of trying to specify the principle is that one action could have two effects, one good and one harmful, which in the case of our patient would be an improvement in lifespan, which is the good effect, and death from the surgery, which is the harmful effect. In this case, the surgeons may do the operation with the intended effect of extending his life, but with the foreseen but unintended risk of death during this operation. Under these circumstances, it may morally be seen as appropriate to proceed with this operation. This is basically known as the doctrine of double effect. It says that if doing something morally good has a morally bad side effect, it's ethically okay to do it, as long as this bad side effect was not intended. Essentially, we are striking a balance between non-maleficence and beneficence here, and this basically becomes the part of the daily routine of a doctor. Even with things that may seem trivial, such as an x-ray, the doctor should be thinking whether the harm done by the radiation is actually justified for that patient. Now, in terms of beneficence, the principle of beneficence sounds easy, since most of us just want to do the right thing for the patient, basically to improve their health outcome. So where is the difficulty? So in the case of our man with the AAA, it seems obvious that the operation that gives him a 90% chance of extending his life is obviously beneficial. We have discussed balancing this against non-maleficence, but suppose I now add a little twist, a little spice to the scenario. Imagine now I say that there is an advancement in medicine that offers an alternative procedure that fixes the AAA, but with only a 1% death rate. The trouble is that the new procedure costs 10 times as much. This suggests that at some point we have to put a constraint on beneficence, as we are limited by the practical constraints such as the cost, the time, and the number of doctors that is needed to basically carry out that procedure. In the end, our medical resources are finite, and we have to bring about the results for the population as a whole, meaning that not every treatment may be offered. There is often controversy in the news where very expensive drugs that would benefit people with rare conditions are not offered by the NHS in the UK or by private companies or insurance companies in the US, because they don't meet the expectations of the general population. This leads nicely into the principle of justice and how to apply justice for this particular patient. So let's say that this gentleman has both methods of treatment available to him. It would not be considered justice if he was offered the first procedure if he lived in one part of the country, but the second or the safer procedure if he lived in another. This would not be seen as justice, seeing as he's being discriminated against based on where he's living. This is also termed as postcode lottery. Now imagine, instead of him being 76, the man with the AAA is now 60. He's very fit, he's still working, he runs half marathons for fun, and why not, he could do a backflip blindfolded. He could be looking at 40 extra years to live with the procedure, and it may make sense to use funding for the more expensive and safer procedure. Conversely, if the same man is 95, he's still smoking, he's fit enough for operation, but he generally has low mobility and a functional reserve, then it may make sense to treat him with the cheaper option so that you have more money left to serve other people. This is not going against the principle of justice, because you are saying that the situation of the two patients is very different, but it's all about how you justify it. So that's it. Jeez, my mouth is hella dry right now. Hope the 4 pillars made sense and that you found this case-based discussion helpful. If you did, drop a like. If you didn't, comment down below or DM me. Remember, the information you've hopefully gained from this video isn't just important for your medical interview. You will be implementing these pillars for the rest of your life as a doctor, albeit a bit more intuitively with practice. So yeah, that's it. In a bit.